So I will introduce Samantha first. Samantha uses she, her pronouns and wears so many hats. Some of you may know her as the Director of Partnerships and Community at the Vermont Relief Collective. Relief's mission is to cultivate connection, share resources, and amplify the voices of people of color in Vermont within our focus areas of land, environment, agriculture, and foodways. And they work as a collaborative ecosystem for growing power and community for members. Samantha serves as a relief representative on the Vermont Land Access and Opportunity Board and Vermont Farm to Plate Steering Committee. Others of you may also recognize Samantha as the Vice President of the Board of Directors at the Middlebury Natural Foods Co-op. Samantha is passionate about local food and ag, particularly cheese, and lives with a farmer who owns a small organic farm on their property. Previously working as a chef for several farm-to-table establishments, she has been involved in food and food systems education for almost 2 decades. Samantha will also never turn down an opportunity to cook over an open fire for a crowd, especially in the pouring rain. I am more than thrilled to have Samantha moderating tonight's panel.
Thanks for being here, everyone. If you need to stand up at some point while we're doing this part, since we all just sat down, I want to encourage you to move if you need to. We want to make sure we keep everybody's attention here for this last portion of the evening. I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves, and I want to make note of something some of you may have noticed, is that everyone who's introducing themselves tonight, we're just going to use whatever name we want you to call us, and this is on purpose. Typically in these spaces, think respected colleges, lots of stone buildings, it's normal that you give your full name among many other titles when you introduce yourself. And that's kind of funny because afterwards, if anyone comes up to me and uses my full name to talk to me, it would actually be kind of weird, right? And so we are using just whatever name we want to be called on purpose here. Requiring people to give a full name to legitimize their presence is a way of controlling access to spaces. It's a way of controlling who is allowed to speak and how they speak. And so in an effort to point this out and actively work against it, we're being really deliberate about only using whatever name we want you to call us, with no pressure to use a whole full name or a full title. And we encourage everybody to think about this idea and the implications it carries even after you leave today. So, panelists,
hey.
Which feels really formal.
Right. Can everyone hear? Can everyone hear?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, you sound great.
I'm hard of hearing, I'm sorry, y'all. Okay.
So if you'd each like to take a second, introduce yourselves, and maybe as a way to start, tell us how you landed in so-called Addison County.
Just thank you everyone for your labor and care in holding space tonight. I'm Z. I use they and he and all Z pronouns. It's been a long journey, but all in all, basically for context, my ancestors were displaced from so-called Barbados to Panama, where I'm from, after escape from chattel slavery. My last person was my great-grandfather. And then from Panama, I myself was displaced to what I call the United States of Terror when I was 5 by the US military. And no one has farmed in my family since my great-great-grandmother a century ago in Gunayala, which is one of the little bitty islands off of the main If-Smiths. That's a funky word. Can y'all say If-Smiths? Right? Doesn't that feel funny in your mouth? So there's a set of islands where our tribal lands, and that's called Gunayala. And as a little kid, in so-called Kentucky and Tennessee, I'm a southerner, hey. My mom showed me, how to grow roses and just flowers that weren't necessarily from the place, but just made her feel happy. And I really just haven't ever been able to stop seeing all the butterflies I saw in that time in my mind. And growing up in the South, I was always outside and seeing everything. And how I ended up here after, 10 years of facilitating reparations-free stores and food sovereignty projects and mutual aid shares and, harm reduction supply kit, like packing parties and all that good stuff. And being in the last place that I co-founded, that we called the Saint Communal Care Space. Unfortunately, last autumn, I was again displaced by gentrification, by direct anti-Blackness, and also what I would call kind of a duel of the great trans displacement of a lot of people like myself who were no longer able to access certain types of medical care in so-called Florida, in the parts that I was, Taino and Tocobaga and Calusa lands. And also the great white trans flight of a lot of white trans folks who had the blood relative family networks and land access in other places, often in the north, funny enough. And then I was houseless in my car, trying to just asking my ancestors to tell me where I'm supposed to land, looking for access to housing and community and safety, and found that in small part in so-called Lenape-Hocking in Philly. And while I was there, I met my incredible partner and Food Sovereignty Project co-facilitator, Jamie. And we both had been longtime farmers on not lands that were stewarded by anyone who had any direct connection to those lands. And through the grace of a lot of different circumstances, support, and community, we were able to access 10 acres about 20 minutes from here. And I've just been gay and in love and trying to figure out how to work with the clay up here ever since. So that's how I ended up here. How about you, baby?
I have to follow that up well. But yeah, thanks again everyone for being here. Thanks Lindsay and Bailey and everyone else at ACORN for all your work here. I'm Jamie. I use they, them pronouns. I originally grew up in New York, Queens and Long Island, the traditional lands of the Munsee Lenape peoples. I've lived in a few different places. I've lived in so-called Arkansas. So I've lived down south for a little bit. I, funny enough, ended up back in the Northeast to go to school in the lands of the Abenican people. And that was really when I started to really realize within myself that something needed to change about the lifestyle I was raised in. One thing that stood out to me and really sticks out to me now that I should have known years ago was, one reason why I grew up thinking that there were so many fruits and vegetables that I hated was because, simple answer, the fruits and vegetables that you find in the city and the suburbs are trash. Yeah. Getting out to a different part of Turtle Island here that's not really very far away from where I grew up helped me to realize that when food is grown locally and ideally by people who actually care about the land they're working with, you can literally taste it. You can really taste, unfortunately, you can taste the slavery in a lot of the food that we eat today. And so food's been a really big part of why I've become involved with land justice and food justice. So my time in Vermont began about 6 years ago, and I did spend some time working on farms, most recently on a farm in northern Vermont, in Franklin County. And like a few different places I lived in the state, I was, again, displaced from that area there. And that was the most recent time that I was displaced either within or outside of the state of Vermont. So last year, I was living in Lenape-Hocking, and that's really where Rizzy and I came together and realized we had this common goal of a land sovereignty project. And I learned a lot about what he was doing down south. And it was an instant match. So So somehow convinced him to come up to Vermont with me as I try to, once again claw my way back up here. And we got really lucky. I tried multiple times to figure out a way to find some land that I could steward myself, or at least contribute to stewarding with ideally people who are indigenous to this region. And I felt like I was out of options, so I decided to go with the racist colonial institution that is the mortgage, and ended up getting lucky enough to find a home here in Addison County, about 10 acres of land that, from the moment I set foot on it, really welcomed me in, but at the same time cried out for help. So with our project here, we hope to not only restore the land that we live on, but provide resources for other Black people to build the skills and connect with their indigeneity so they can do the same on land that they steward. And that's really what brought me here, sitting in front of you all today. Thanks again, everyone.
Awesome, thanks to you both for sharing. Really appreciate that. And we're gonna get more into some of your thoughts and feelings in a second. First, I have a question for everybody else here. We have to talk about the movie that we just watched. It felt both incredibly long and incredibly short, I would say. I want more. And so I'm curious if anyone in the audience would like to share. We're gonna do this popcorn style. Choose 1 or 2 words that describe your reaction to the film. So if you're somebody who likes a long sentence, this might be a challenge. But if anybody feels called to just toss out, what is your reaction to that film? What did it make you think of? What did it make you feel? What's something that really is still sticking in your mind afterwards?
Hopeful.
Responsibility.
Connection. Tears. Reparations. Joy.
Community.
That's it?
We know y'all have feelings.
Anger.
Anger?
Yeah. Frustration. Commitment.
Dedication.
Yearning.
Trust.
Exhaustion. Intergenerational exhaustion.
Grief and hope.
I'm gonna break my own rule and say 3 words. Power of nerds.
Passion.
Yeah, passion.
Generations of work.
Righteous sacrifice.
Yeah, there were a lot of babies in that film.
That was so cute.
So I want to turn this back to you both, see Jamie. What were your reactions to that film, especially as 2 Black folks who finally have access to land?
Want me to go first, babe? Okay. So, I'll just say briefly that I think the biggest part is just feeling both this overwhelming sense of grief and overwhelming sense of excitement. I'm really excited to see people like me that are dedicated to the things that I'm dedicated to, that this entire earth needs and everybody needs on it, right? But I also am just saddened that we're still fundamentally fighting the plantation, right? These ways of being and norms are they're literally entrenched in the soil. They've changed the nature of soil. They've changed our epigenetics, some of the stuff I'll talk about later. It's just ouch. And then overarchingly, it's just like, ancestors, thank you, because the ancestors of my people and all of the wonderful Black people we saw, there's so much unseen labor, right, that you're never gonna see in a film, and you're never gonna see documented, but is like part of the reason we can all literally still eat food. Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. So watching the film and then being a farmer in Vermont, I never would have expected that I would have to be a pioneer in the year 2024. And yeah, my ancestors have definitely told me, even if you don't know our names, you're gonna, one way or another, find out who we are. And I've definitely been bashed over the head a few times, spiritually and physically, to really come to grips with that. So it's a really big responsibility that I see us taking on, but also we shouldn't have to take that on.
So my next question maybe starts to touch on that, so maybe Jamie, I'll start with you. When we talked, in a prep planning call before today, you both were just using words to describe the land, plants, beings on them, the same words that a lot of people use to describe their family, other people. Z, you said, you asked a question at one point, these cherry trees are under-supported, who has been singing to them? Which is a question I love, because it's this idea that they don't just need water or better soil or fertilizer, they need other kinds of support. And so I'm curious for both of y'all, can you talk about the importance of seeing land and the beings on it as kin, and how that both affects the way that you farm and your well-being as a farmer?
Yeah, I think language, to begin with, is just very important because it reveals a lot of our outward and sometimes underlying feelings about the things we're talking about. That's one. When we view anything, another being, a non-human animal, a human, or any kind of object as a commodity or something from which to extract some sort of imaginary value from, that's always going to reflect in the way we treat that animal, that creature, or that object that we're dealing with. And it's important for us to recognize that the earth was here before us, and will probably be here after we're gone. We have to learn to live on the land, or excuse me, we have to learn to live with the land, not on it. It's the exact opposite of what I wanted to say. And I'm not the first person to say that either. A way I like to also explain it is make a parallel to the way that a lot of us have to work at our jobs. In a lot of cases, we all work with supervisors or managers or bosses to some degree who are trying to extract the maximum amount of labor and production that they can out of us, right? Even if it kills us, no matter what they're expecting, we're gonna, pump ourselves with coffee and painkillers and other drugs just to make sure we can do the duties that they imposed on us to give us a paycheck so we can afford to live. Studies even show that when bosses have their employees working less hours, right, or getting to work hours that are more conducive to what their bodies want, they're literally more productive. All right, I like to draw that parallel to the land as well. If we treat the land like a resource that we just need to extract the most value that we can out of it, and not take into account time for rest, letting the land rest, letting our bodies rest, letting the creatures on it rest and experience peace, then we're going to see things start to backfire. All right. The climate crisis we're in is a direct result of the extremely exploitative farming practices that we've been watching happen for decades, ever since the Industrial Revolution. course, as we saw in the film, that began on a much larger scale with the plantation economy. And we're starting to see that backfire. It's been backfiring in the global south. It's been backfiring in the entire continent of Africa that's been gutted for well over 100 years now. Being in a 100-year flood zone and seeing 2 floods back-to-back years on the exact same calendar date tells me that those consequences are a lot closer to home than we initially, many of us wanted to acknowledge. And we need to change the way we do a lot of things if we're going to save each other and save the earth.
Ooh, Lord. Yeah, see, this is why I'm in love with him. Okay. Well, yeah, I'd just say the little bit I'd have to add, really, because, go ahead. You know, it's like they were saying, like, our perception of other animals, right, because we are animals, human and non-human, has always affected how we treat each other, right? There's specific books on how speciesism, right, the idea that you have, you know, feathers, you have scales, right, you're different than me, you're less than me, is directly related to how, like, the reason Black people can be called gorillas and it's an insult is because of the way that colonizers have framed gorillas, right, and framed Black people in juxtaposition. You have to create myths about both. And that was something we really saw in chattel slavery. And I don't mind me, like, I'm both an autistic nerd and also have a history and philosophy degree where that's like my specialty. Is resistance history, because I'll keep saying it. Chattel slavery is white history, not Black history. Resistance history is Black history. So I'm trying to figure out how do we get out of what we're in. But if I see you as prey, right? If I see you as a resource, as a commodity separate from my experience, then that's how I'm going to treat you, right? But if I see you as kin, as someone like me who feels pain, fear, love, right? Me and the chickens, has community, have their own ways of communicating and being, then that's how I'll treat you. So, like, if you want the land to reciprocate treatment, then the treatment has to be positive. The treatment has to be, like, intentional and intersectional, or you're just gonna get those nasty tasting tomatoes. I also thought I hated tomatoes. And then I was like, oh my gosh, there's so many tomatoes. They're so delicious. So that's what I was saying.
Excellent. And you guys, like, just keep teeing it up for me. So, like, if words matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Farms in Vermont are named after all different kinds of things, like the road they're on, the person who started it, produce, a local mountain. But your farm, it's called Abolition in Action. And if words matter, tell us how you came to that name, what it means, what's its significance to you.
Go ahead, Mom.
Ooh, okay, let me go off. Okay. So, well, like, getting free on a base level means that we're abolishing spaces, people, systems that directly harm us. And we're replacing them instead with what heals us and makes us all well. The earth included, right? And that's at the center of how we live our interpersonal individual lives, how we live as facilitators, and how we plan on and are going about growing food and connecting with this land. And, like, something that's really pivotal that I feel like wasn't touched on enough in the film was the 13th Amendment. Can anyone raise their hand if you've ever heard of the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and read it in its entirety? Ooh, I'm excited to surprise some people. Okay. So a big part of it. Oh, also another question. Raise your hand if you think slavery's over. Okay, we have smart people in this room. Well, the 13th Amendment is explicit about that, right? It says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction, which is one of the reasons the U.S. military has bases in, almost 200 countries. So the plantation model is still very real. Even the colonial law that often tries to use a lot of words to hide its intentions of the people that are writing these laws. The plantation model is open. It's very real. And right now, in Essex, for instance, this state is trying to rezone and fund another plantation to replace the Chittenden Regional Plantation in South Burlington, and deceptively calls it a correctional facility. So we both, as we talked about, like, we've cared for colonizer-owned land. We both worked with previously incarcerated people and just like systems of really severe violence, both obvious and not obvious, right? Because some of this was things that we usually don't see as obvious. This isn't what's talked about generally. And the conditions of these colonizer-owned lands were just outright anti-Black, extractive, and harmful, even to the people who owned it, in terms of short-term and long-term effects, right? But to get access to the land that we're on now, 20 minutes from here, we weren't able to directly consult the Abenaki peoples. We had to pay colonizers. And the people who actually, quote unquote, own land, as if that's a thing you can do, is the bank.
Right.
Is a silent, violent institution that evades all of our lives in some way, I'm sure. And now, right, on this land, part of abolition in action is this live composting everywhere, doing as much as we can to feed the land, giving offerings to the trees. And the people who owned it before, like, they ignored all of these needs while getting to still reap, because the land is resilient even when you're mean and nasty to it. They got to reap all this beauty and this bounty. And Abolition in Action Farms, we want to disrupt directly that mistreatment, that neglect of our peoples and all indigenous lands, starting with us. And we just want to make sure that abolitionists know explicitly where they are welcome. And we want abusers to know where they're not. So that's fine.
Well, that's it. Jamie, anything you want to add to that?
Not at all, no.
So you shared something interesting when we talked before that, like, I wrote it down then and I've been thinking about it a lot, that one of the reasons that you chose to be here is because Vermont is not a hyper-surveilled place for Black folks, because there just aren't that many here. But the other side of that is that, you know, is what Vermont is. It's super rural, it's very, very white, and the communities here are really insular. It can be really hard to break into community here, even if people are friendly to you in the grocery store. And so a lot of land access conversations are about making it financially possible to access land, but they don't talk about what it takes to keep people on land, which is safe and welcoming communities. And I want to know, are you finding safe and welcoming community in Shoreham? And what do you think needs to change about how we define those words?
You've been here longer. You go ahead.
I guess the most correct thing I can say is there have been no blazing red flags. However, I don't define that. I don't define safety as the absence of red flags or warning signs. Everywhere, really every time I leave my house, walking anywhere on Turtle Island really, but especially in the United States of Terror, the legacy of what has taken place on this land in particular and what continues to take place today is always going to be over my head like a cloud. So until we start to see very affirmative and undoubtable gestures to undo all the violence, not undo it, but heal and I can't think of the word I'm trying to come up with right now, but to heal and recuperate from all the violence that has taken place on this land. Until those things happen, I can't say that I'm ever going to feel safe or welcome. Because at this point, the only reason I've been able to secure land in this area is because I did enough to convince a lender that they won't lose a bunch of money by letting me have a home.
That's real. That's real. Yeah, I would. I'm not gonna lie. That's been the biggest and toughest transition for me. Like, you know, I'm a Southerner, right? I'm a Florida boy. Like, obviously the cold is crazy. It's just, that's wild. So, like, the elements you would think, right, would be the toughest part. But unfortunately, it's the social aspect. It's like, we want to have, like they're having, right, educational youth programs where we bring marginalized people, especially Black kids and their families who are survivors and victims of food apartheid in places like Lenape, Hocking, Philly, and, you know, Mohican stewarded lands and other stewarded lands in so-called New York. And it's like, how are we going to ensure that the beautiful Black children who are going to, like, come here are actually safe? Like, and how do we give them a sense of safety when we have to make sure that they don't even go past the property? Because, like you said, a hello in the grocery store does not ensure my safety or my freedom. It doesn't ensure that you won't directly confront me when you feel threatened by my Black indigenous ways of being. It doesn't ensure that you won't call the state to murder me because you don't even want to do it yourself, which is a big reason I miss Florida. Because at least you'll just come up to me directly. It's just like really tough to grapple with. And then now we have the stop sign on our street full of bullet holes as of a few days ago, and I don't really know what to do with that.
And before we move to the next question, I want to really highlight too that, like, this is something that I hear a lot, is that the word safe doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. And that some of us in the room, you know you are, have the luxury of never really having to think about what safe means. And others never get to escape it. And so I really want people to think about that as we're talking about issues of land access. The other side of that is land tenure. It's not enough to give people money to buy a piece of property. Because if they're not safe there, why would they stay? And so on the theme of displacement, quick audience poll. Raise your hand if somebody within the last 2 generations in your family, we'll make it 3 even, was forcibly displaced from their home. So, like, displacement is a theme in this room, and displacement is a theme in our country, right? It's a part of what makes up the people who live here. And so, Z and Jamie, I'm kind of curious, like, how do you see our country's history of displacement and the trauma that it creates and carries? How do you see that affecting both land access and land tenure?
See, when I tell you, you're one of the best facilitators I have ever. You say real words to my face so that I can say real words back, and I love it. I love it. Yeah, I will say, like, something for context that I think it's important to know that there's so much to cover. I'm sure there were so many things that didn't make it into the film that they wanted to. But, like, a lack of cultural centers, like, where can Black people go to gather safely or, like, be well mentally, emotionally, spiritually? It's like, according to the body of knowledge that came during and after, I don't know if y'all have heard of post-traumatic slave syndrome. Anybody heard of that? Okay, we got one person. So that was like a term coined by Joy DeGraw Leary, and it's defined as multi-generational trauma together with continued oppression and absence of opportunity to access the benefits available in society. And one of the things that that book proved to non-Black people, because Black people know because our bodies are data points, is that anti-Blackness kills Black people. Even when wealthy and otherwise healthy, like Black people get access to land and clean air and clean water and everything is serene and great, we still have higher rates of like heart murmurs, anxiety, depression, from like not just what our bodies interpersonally have experienced, but what our ancestors' bodies have experienced. So it's like when I'm physically trying to touch land, right, like my body is connected to it in a very particular way because of pre-chattel slavery, and carceral slavery that we're experiencing right now. And so like, that can be really painful. I don't mean like, ooh, it makes me want to cry, even though it does, but like physically in my body right now, like discussing this, I am feeling muscle tension that I'm going to have to like do ancestral and spiritual and physical work to undo just from like sharing this information with y'all. Because like social lynching is a thing that happens that a lot of people don't understand or want to talk about. And that is like when people experience, maybe you don't like punch me or hit me directly, but experiencing social violence that pushes me into a place where I'm living in my car, or pushes me into a place where I'm just like going from place to place trying to find my basic needs. Because, for instance, like I have to worry about, oh, will the people that live here want to buy produce, no matter how great quality it is, from someone that looks like me, right? That has all the things that are tied to that. And that's not just like something that a lot of these people at least have as being like cisgendered, right? Their gender and their assigned sex match up, right? And their at least perceived able-bodiedness, right, is just, even those things that a lot of other Black farmers have as ways that they can shield themselves socially from those types of violence, I don't have. Like, we don't have. So trying to engage with the land physically and spiritually is its own mountain, literally, to climb on top of, because of displacement, being somewhere. All of the farming skills I've built are based in not here. You know, so it's like, and that's the experience of so many Black people. Like they talked about how, you know, they're like, why are we in Grafton, New York, when we are scared that like our kids are gonna experience some of the things that they experience living in, you know, small rural or big rural majority white places. It's like these are all the levels of stressors and things that are like more than the very difficult part of actually growing food. It's like I wish I could just worry about growing food. I wish I didn't have to worry about how I've had COVID 4 times and I used to internationally climb mountains and now I can walk some days of the month. Now I have to figure out in a community of people that don't look like me how I'm gonna convince y'all that I'm worthy of support so that even the basic farming part can physically happen, because I literally can't do it. I have all these skills and knowledge of like 15 years and just literally can't physically do or enact most of it without direct material support from other people. How about you, baby?
I don't have a whole lot to add to that, but an example of land sovereignty being pivotal that I like to talk about sometimes is the town of Mound Bayou, Mississippi. During the civil rights movement in the 60s, that was a Black town, founded as a Black town, that most, if not all, civil rights leaders that you all can think of went through that town, and it served as a great base for rest and recovery, but also planning for how they were going to get free. So I think that's a really great example of just having basic access to land and being with your people in that land and being able to exist in some sort of a degree of peace and peace and quiet really it's really important to all peoples, but especially Black peoples here, to really figure out within ourselves what we need and how to get those things. And that's all I have to say.
So I feel like I would like to encourage everybody, can we please give our panelists a round of applause for that? More valuable than clapping. There are things that are more valuable than like clapping. It's important to like hear their words, to actively listen, to come away from this with new thoughts or ideas, to be challenged. But just as valuable as those things are like actual tangible action, which Lindsay was talking about in the beginning. And so before we take some audience questions, I'm going to pass the mic to Lindsay, who's going to give everybody some very real ways that you can actually do more than applause.
Thank you, Samantha, Jamie, and Z. Really amazing facilitation. Yeah, great panel. Thank you. Thank you for sharing everything. So yeah, before we get to the question and answer, which I'm sure many of you have some questions for these fine folks, we have some real calls to action of, yeah, where do we move from here? So what can Vermonters do today to increase land access for BIPOC farmers? Well, I'm glad we asked that question. We've got a few statewide and regional organizations that are working on this on a larger level, even though the point of tonight's conversation is really to talk about this hyper-local, staying here in Addison County and the Champlain Valley. But we've got the Land Access and Opportunity Board, of which Samantha's a part of, and that's housed under the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And you can find that online. You can Google the LAOB in Vermont, and they're working on policy stuff, and Samantha can talk about it way more eloquently than I can. So that's one way. There's the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust, also known as NEFOC. And under NEFOC, there's the Every Town Project, which is trying to get BIPOC land ownership in every town in Vermont. And the way they're doing that is to hold the land in trust through NEFOC, and then every town project matches BIPOC land stewards with parcels of land and homes that meet their needs and interests. It's a longer timeline to really develop those relationships of trust. So if anybody in this room has parcels of land that they're considering transitioning to somebody of color, I would recommend reaching out to NEFOC, and you can Google that as well. Or the website is nefoclandtrust.org/everytown. But again, Google will show you the way. And last but not least, we have Abolition in Action's crowdsourcing page, which is through Ko-fi. Is that how you pronounce it? Okay, so it's ko-fi.com/abolition in action farms. We have QR codes all around and outside. And when we were speaking earlier in our pre-panel call, Z and Jamie were saying how, they could raise us a little bit as $100,000, and like that would be the bare minimum that they would need to keep going. But that's really working with a lot of volunteers, a lot of free donations, and not optimal work conditions. So really their goal is $1 million. And knowing who's in this county, knowing who's here, I think they could get there through collective fundraising. So I would encourage you to go to that website. There is a wish list of items, which I can read out. But before I do that, Jamie and Z wanted to note that they really want, if you're going to offer donations in the form of items and not money, to please buy that from small Black-owned businesses and do not support any large violent corporations. So really think about where your money's going, who it's supporting, and every level of the supply chain. You can donate cash. I'm sure that's appreciated. But if you would rather donate items, there are things like greenhouses, chainsaws, pots, gloves, clippers, hoses, twine, tarps, shovels, rakes, seeders, insect netting, irrigation systems, trellises, laminators, straw hats, composting toilets, insect repellent dispensers, greens harvesters, ladders, tractors, sunscreen, seeds, plants, signage, soil testing, tractors, trucks and trailers, utility vehicles, freezers and fridges for cold storage, buses for transport of volunteers and participants, fuel, cameras, mics, mortgage help, and farmers markets fees. That's a lot. Again, go to the website at ko-fi.com/abolition in action farms, or check out one of the QR codes we have posted around the room. And then I'll pass it over to Bailey, who can speak a little bit more.
Quickly, also wanted to highlight, many of you may have noticed the beautiful zines that we had out displayed, created by Middlebury alum and Knoll alum Crystal Zhu. They worked really hard as their senior thesis to put together a list of black farmers in Vermont. It's called Farming in, remind me of the title? Black Vermont Farming, thank you. On stage. It's really beautiful, and we just want to encourage anyone who wants to take one home is welcome to, but that if you do, please donate to Abolition in Action in order to share some reciprocity through that. But feel free to look through them as well.
Oh, can I add one thing?
Yes, of course.
We also have a lot of different organic, local foraged herbs that are really supportive for sleep, like yarrow, stinging nettle for lung health and stuff. So if you'd like to, give and support us and then get something from our giveaway, you can do that as well.
And so now we'll open it up for Q&A.
And I'm just going to add one thing. When Lindsay's reading that list, yes, it's a long list, but I kept thinking every single thing on there, like, oh, yeah, yes, that makes sense. Like, I live on a farm. We need all those things too. We have some of them. And so if you're feeling like $100,000, $1 million, that's crazy. Think about that list again and how much all of those things actually cost, because it's not a crazy number. It's not a crazy list. It's perfectly reasonable. It's the bare minimum. So I think for those of us who are willing to stick it out a few minutes longer, we're open to taking any audience questions. I think we're going to run some mics around the room, so everybody has to yell over mask. And I'm going to pass this mic back to Bailey. So if anyone has a question, if you want to raise a hand or stand.
Does anybody have any questions? All right, I'll go ahead.
Thank you all for sharing. It was really sweet hearing y'all's experience. And something that I was thinking a lot about was y'all's focus on speciesism. I don't think I've ever heard that word before, and it was like kind of beautiful to hear right now. And like y'all articulate the feathers and the scales and human skin and just like how that creates so many refs that don't really need to be there. And I'm curious if you could share a story that you had with a kid or someone that you really respect where you're able to articulate that to them. And then like, yeah, they had a light in their eyes and they were able to realize that there's this equality, there's this interconnectedness, there's this like shared struggle with a fox and with a bee. Yeah, what was that like? Can you share a story where you like were able to help someone see that? I'm just curious to hear that, and I think those are the stories that kind of motivate us to do this work of like really building solidarity across species and across difference. Yeah, thanks.
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you for asking. I will say I think probably one of my most memorable times was one time in so-called Tampa Bay in a food apartheid affected area called Robles Park that we were doing the reparations free story in every month. We would bring, plants and seeds and dirt, and we would just teach the kids and families like whatever they would want to learn that we could share. And we did this one kind of like teaching that was asked for on like tenants' rights, and we explained basically like tenants' rights to children through like a potted plant, and also explained kind of how, I'll give an example of how we were using a lot of aloe plants that were donated. And I remember this kid was like touching it, this like, I think they were like 6. And this beautiful little sun-kissed black child was touching this plant, and they accidentally like squeezed it a little bit too hard, and it just like kind of gushed everywhere and the skin broke. And they were like, oh my God, like, did I break it? Am I gonna kill the plant? Is everything okay? Like, they're 6, so like their whole world is rocked right now. And I was like, hey, like, just like us, you know, as long as we sing to them, we ask them if they're okay, and we ask them what we need, and we don't keep putting pressure on them, and we're really gentle and kind to them, and we make sure they have enough water and sun. Just like us, you know, if we get, you know, beat up by the police, and if we survive it, and like, especially because some of these kids, right, already have this experience. So people don't get like, oh my gosh, are you talking about that to a 6-year-old? They're already experiencing that. Some of them have seen their relatives murdered in front of them. So for context, they're all right. And it was just like, I was like, you know, if like we're taking back a house and like the cops come in, like, you know, they put too much pressure on us and like we bleed everywhere and like we survive it. Like, if our community cares for us and checks in on us and sings to us and tends our wounds and like make sure we have enough water and we have enough food, like, we will be okay too, and we will make it through. And then when we grow more, right, when we grow more skin cells, when this plant grows more skin cells, like, you're gonna be able to see, you know, what happened to our body. There's gonna be a story there. But as long as we get taken care of, like, everybody can be okay. We just have to get together and make sure. And they were like, oh, and like they had a clarification, like 1 or 2 words, which I'm in elementary age education, so like I'm prepared. It's okay. But I just really remember that moment because I feel like a lot of adults like don't get into things that are really important from a young age, which is why you see the way a lot of the adults are in this so-called country right now. And that moment just taught me, like, if we just teach people, not just through like written stuff, right, and things that are big and theorized, it's like if you get really, really basic and you relate it to people's lived experience, they'll understand the interconnectedness most of the time, especially kids. So yeah, that's a great question. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for having us. I'm a teaching assistant at the Hannaford Career Center, which is based here in Middlebury. If you haven't experienced it, come by. So often I come to things like this and I write down a website and try to connect, or whatever, best intentions fail. So I'm just going to ask a personal question right here. Thanks all.
That's fair.
Can we come visit you, and maybe to involve everyone else in the room, what would it be like if we brought an ag class to your farm? Maybe you could walk us through what a little tour would be like. Would we be able to purchase some tomatoes and come back and make salsa in our class, or something like that?
Oh, that I appreciate you very much. That is a thoughtful share and ask. Well, one, that's one of the reasons, like, on the flyer that everybody should have been able to see and get passed around, take a photo of if you want to, or take one, has a phone number, right? You can, I suggest texting versus calling first, just because we're running a farm, doing things. But yeah, basically August 31st, from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. if anybody's free. We do center disability justice, so it'll be just like here, except we provide free COVID tests and ask people to do a rapid test as well. You can come for a composting and foraging workshop. So basically what will happen is there are 2 entrances to the farm. There's the part at the bottom of the hill that's like the big acreage, like the big field with like the woods and the brook and all that. And then there's the top of the hill that is like the homestead itself. So this will be on the homestead. And so when you come in, everybody would, if you haven't already COVID tested, you would do so outside. We offer you water, of course. I usually play jazz because I love jazz. And we're gonna walk around and we're going to start by singing to the trees, if you're able to and willing, because Lord knows those trees look just so... There's only so much song in my one heart. It needs more song. They need more songs. And then secondly, we're gonna go around and we're gonna identify some burdock because they are lost and displaced from so-called England. They didn't ask to be here, but their presence unfortunately is harmful to the native plants and peoples of this land, and we're trying to be respectful. So we're gonna forage them together after we ask for their permission to engage with them. Bring tools if you have them. If you don't, we have very limited and we can take turns. It was hard enough just to get the place. And then we will dig up some burdock root, very sturdy. So I will be instructing because with all my nerve damage from COVID, I unfortunately cannot physically do that. But then we're gonna talk about what the different supportive properties of the burdock is and where it comes from and what it can do and how it can support you. And then we get to take it home because basically you would be able to like dry it and use it to make a stew if you want to eat the root. That's a little much for me. That's an acquired taste. But you can make a tea, right? I make teas out of just about everything that I forage because that's just how I enjoy it. I feel like you really get the flavors, but with my autism, don't get all those textures, which can be a little bit much. So that, for instance, could be like something that you bring back. And then if we have enough time, I'll show some other plants that we also have in the space that we can forage, but that's the main focus because they really need to go. And also before it gets cold, I would love for people to have the supportive properties of burdock. And then the other thing is the 2 cherry trees in the front that you were referencing earlier, very sad and under-supported. So we'll be doing like a collective ritual where in a circle around the trees we'll be burying live compost that we've accrued before people get there. And we'll be first, of course, speaking to the land, letting it know what's going to happen, thanking it for allowing us to be there. And then we're going to engage in some instructive live in-ground composting to make sure that we try to feed the land as much as possible before the soil is, too hardened and cold. Plus, before it's too cold for me to go outside, because still getting acclimated to up north. I appreciate y'all for holding space. Lord knows. But can you think of anything else maybe I'm missing? I love you. You're so affirming.
Maybe I realize I use tomatoes kind of as an existential example. I don't expect that you're growing tomatoes.
You're good.
Now as of starting up. So thank you. That was wonderful to hear what's happening right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the stages we're at. We're just feeding the land because Lord knows if we just try to, like Jamie was saying, just start reaping from it, we would have a terrible time. Why do that?
Wait, is that a hand right?
Yeah.
I think this one. It was really awesome to see Leah's and her husband's vision manifest on their farm and hear about where that vision came from and how it developed. And I was wondering if you guys could just talk a little bit more about your vision for the space and the community. I just would love to hear more about what you're working to create.
Oh, baby, you want to start? Because you're the one that first had vision in this place specifically. I just had vision overall. It was for Georgia, but I'm here.
Yeah, Weird Vision is a sacred space for Black rest, play, and joy. In addition to an educational space, especially for Black children, to learn a lot of the skills that we've been displaced out of over generations. Learning how to care for ourselves, how to be with the land, rather than having to simply simply fight for our lives on a daily basis. So that's our grand vision, and we're gonna pursue that by holding all these skill shares, by performing all these rituals with each other and reconnecting with our indigeneity. And we want this space to be memorable, not because we stewarded it, but because it was collectively stewarded by Black people who all had very similar goals, or even if we had different goals, all shared a common vision of on a basic level, freedom. Yeah, do you want to add anything?
I feel like from on the how we got there, right? Looking for a little bit more of that is, although we're regionally, from different places, historically and interpersonally, I think a big part of how we both got to having a collective vision versus an individualistic one, like how they kind of said they started with more of an individualistic vision, right? And then it expanded. We've always had a collective vision because as Black, trans, disabled lesbians, if we don't survive without collectivism, particularly us. Black people as a whole, but particularly some of us that even amongst Black folks are towards the bottom of that respectability and worthyship hierarchy. Y'all see me, you can't see my face right now, but because of, I have light sensitivity from being bear maced a bunch in my eyes on purpose directly in 2020, and it's permanently giving me really severe light sensitivity. And then, with COVID, but it's I'm very on top of all of those things, always been very visibly indigenous in both my ways of being and now as an adult, how I physically look. So there's just never been any option in the Black, trans, disabled, lesbian community for us to not hold each other up because we would be dead. It took a lot for us to make it here. There were many, many moments where we almost did not, hoping and working towards less of those moments, right? And it was just seeing my own suffering, seeing the suffering of my people. I historically come from a warrior and healing people. We tend to the trees, we tend to the water. We're forest islanders. It's a whole thing. So it's part of it is not just me. Part of it is my ancestors are this is what we're doing. And my body was this is what we're doing. And then my interpersonal identities were also this is what we're doing. And it just kind of developed as I connected with more people, including Jamie, to just see more ideas of similar people like us, of what that has to look like. Not even just what we wish it would be, but what it has to look like for us to make it to not just the end of hopefully beautiful, long, supported lives, but the end of the next election cycle that people tend to focus more on than supporting the people around them. So that's definitely how I feel both of us came to the vision we have now. I love you. Oh, I'm sorry.
Before we move on to our closing, is there anything else you'd like to share, Z or Jamie? Is there anything else you'd like to say to people? You don't have to. I just wanted to open it up one last time. You're good. You sure? You sure? I love hearing your voice. Okay, I'm gay, y'all.
I'll say the last thing is I just want y'all to, one important thing that I want y'all to notice, both in the film in terms of the representation and even just hearing Jamie and I right now, on some level, usually the Black farmers that get to be and stay farmers are particular type of Black person who is rewarded by particular types of non-Black people. They get the support because they're seen as respectable and worthy. Like, I'm sure, like, basically, they shouldn't have to have made this whole film, and we shouldn't have to do all this, even though I'm happy to share, because, like, you know, I'm a twink and I love to talk. But it just doesn't need to be all of that for you to see the history of what a lot of Black people have coined as Blaxploitation. The global exploitation from our cell phones, right, to everything made in this room, right? So almost everything we see around us, the metals that were extracted in this microphone, the rubbers in my shoes, like, these things come from local, domestic, and international anti-Black, colonialist, slavery, exploitation, and domination. And like, just because we all have positive intentions doesn't mean we can't make mistakes and be anti-Black. Even Black people can be anti-Black, just not with the same institutional backing and support. So just like, as you move forward, and if you want to build community with us, because we would love to build community with you and grow some food and heal some land, just keep that in mind, right? And like, if you are with us and you feel discomfort, rather than like trying to socially lynch us, maybe just ask, why do I feel discomfort over the way that someone else who looks different than me is being that I don't understand? So yeah, I appreciate y'all, and thank you for holding space tonight and for covering your beautiful faces, because we don't need to kill each other together. That's silly.
Thank you all for coming. I had a closing, but I think that's way stronger than my closing, so I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you all for staying. It's perfectly late in the evening for us to drive home and think about all these really interesting questions you posed for us. And thank you, Jamie and Z and Samantha, for being up on stage and for joining us this evening. And welcome to the community. Thank y'all.